got to deal with. So Elton, our good friend, who I will say from a tuning perspective, this guy is like, I don't want to call him a guru, but he's a nerd. He nerds out on tuning stuff. And from a coaching perspective, I probably have more coaching conversations with him than anyone. Literally any coach in this country. Right, so that's the direction we're going to go. We have some bows here from people who are here. We're going to talk about some things that are going on, go through them, and see if we can also help. We're not making changes today, unless you say yes, please make changes, because you still have, unless you're shooting tomorrow. We're not doing that. But that's up to you. So Elton, why don't you lead the discussion?
Okay. So I will preface it with a couple statements. One, if you are continuing to shoot this weekend, take this knowledge, put it in your back pocket, and try it on Monday.
Yeah.
Okay? Not everybody is as brave as we should be, but that's okay. Confidence is really important on the shooting line. Two, what I'm going to teach you is the way I approach tuning, and is the way I teach tuning. I'm going to say it right now, because it will be an internet argument within 20 seconds. This is not the only way to tune.
I don't know anything about those.
This is not the only way to tune, right? Everybody has their own approach. What I will tell you is what I tell all my students, is that there's a path that has been forged by some of the top shooters, right? And if you look at all of those top shooters, there are certain threads, commonalities, where they do certain things the same way. Now, not every top shooter does everything exactly the same way. That's part of their personality, their shooting style, etc. But if you look at the general mass of things, there are certain facets of setup and tuning that are almost always exactly the same. Now, I'm not saying you have to follow those facets. I will never force someone to do that. I put the door in front of you, it's your choice to walk through it. But those archers have achieved what they have in the shortest amount of time because they're following that forged path. So what I present to you is information that has been tread well, that has gotten people down the road faster than trying to experiment and do their own thing. I'm not saying you can't. You may discover something on your own, but if you want to get further forward, faster, follow that well-worn path. Don't strike out on your own if you don't have to, okay? There's a lot of good knowledge out there. I'm gonna ask for a show of hands. How many Barebow archers here either have not started Barebow or have started within the last year? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so about half the room. Okay, that's good. That's a great audience. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna talk about normally what I do when I'm setting up a brand new bow, okay? Working with a student or myself. We'll go through some of the steps. Some of them real obvious. You've all done it before. There may be details that you're not paying attention to, so I'll try to explain those and share those. When we're done, there'll be my bow's sitting there. I think Frank's is sitting over there somewhere.
Yeah.
As an example of what alignment should look like. Okay. So the first thing, obviously, everyone's got their riser, right? Rest. Okay, your rest needs to go on. There's almost always 2 threaded holes on your riser. Use them both. I've seen people try to cheat and use one. What happens if you only have one pivot point? Anybody?
It moves.
It can move, right. Do you want stuff moving in the middle of a shoot? No. That's not good for your shot.
That's okay.
What is archery?
It's
about consistency. It's doing the same thing every single time, right?
Why it's where it's at.
Insert the front screw. Take a plunger. Back out the barrel nut. I'm using a biter. I recommend biter personally because the consistency of their engineering. Okay, it's loose right now. Pick. I don't care which way you pick. Pick. Push down against both or push up against both. Do not just set some nebulous angle. Why? Because if this ever comes loose, when you take your bow apart for whatever reason, you know how to put it back in the same spot every time. If I go, I'm gonna push it up every time.
Excuse me again.
Yep, go ahead. And tighten it. If it ever comes loose, I immediately know, just tighten it in that way.
There's another way to do that. After he's done, he gets it set, you take a pencil and you trace the whole rest on the riser. If he ever tightens it up.
I'm there.
You know, I mean, it just has to look good. It doesn't have to be actually tuned.
I'm getting it. You know my obsessive compulsive disorder.
I'm well aware.
All right. So
oh, go ahead. Tighten that
I
up.
do it with a Sharpie.
you can do it with Sharpie. You can
yeah.
do it with anything. If you're really brave, you can etch it with a.
Yeah, but again, and I'm taking a pencil, and I'm going all along here, and tracing this whole thing so that if this comes loose, something happens, I gotta take it apart, whatever. The other thing you want to do is mark the rest where the riser is, so you get the depth.
Right.
So depth, and then up and down here.
So there's been a few internet questions like, well, how far deep should I set this? Really doesn't matter. It's personal preference. I like to set it a little bit further back, but again, it doesn't matter. People obsess about the wrong things sometimes. All right, so we have our plunger mounted and we have our rest mounted. People are gonna be like, well, where's my center shot? Is it center with the string or is it just outside the string? And I'm gonna tell you right now, for Barebow, it doesn't matter because you're starting your setup and it's not precise. So guess, get it close. Don't worry about if it's off, inside, outside, whatever, okay? And that's probably going to raise some hackles. But for Barebow, that's my opinion of the case, and I'll explain why in a second. So we've talked about putting the rest in, putting the plunger in. For consistency, pick up, down, whichever. Then we're going to move the limb alignment. This is an older Epic. It has Hoyt's alignment bar system, which uses shims. So we're not going to futz with that because it's a little more kludgy to do. Most of you know about lateral limb alignment. All right, here's a Gilo GT27. There's 4 set screws. For people new to this, you take the 2 outer ones out, leaving the 2 in the center. Okay, you thread your limb in.
Hold on before you do that. I just want to demonstrate one thing.
Sure.
You see, everyone here is familiar with your screws that are on each side, right? You can loosen it up. It takes it back and forth. You have your screw in the middle. Always make sure that that is tight. Right? One way that you can get a general alignment before you even throw limbs in here is simply by looking where this sits in that pocket. If you really want to get into it and you get a micrometer and you can go in and measure each side just to set it and make sure that both of these relatively match before you throw the limbs on initially. I've done that many times. It gets it super, super close right off the bat.
Right. Go ahead.
So what is the screw in the center for?
The screw in the center holds the brass dovetail pocket in place. It's the pivot point which allows this entire thing
But that
to move
doesn't
back
have to
and
be
forth.
loose to check the set screws.
So talking to Vittorio, you want it snug with a little bit of tension. Where's the tip? Okay, that's the red is the brass piece. This is the limb pocket. There are 4 set screws, but 2 specifically, and then the 2 that we're going to remove during tuning, okay, of the lateral limb alignment, LLA. You may see that abbreviation a lot. That's what that means. That screw you're asking about is the pivot point, which allows this to move that way or that way. So if you crank this down, guess what this thing doesn't want to do? It doesn't want to move. If this thing's loose, what's it going to do?
It's going to rattle.
Exactly, it's going to waggle all over the place.
You'll hear
Snug it all the way down, add a couple of ounces additional torque, just so it's snug, and that's good enough. It shouldn't, with a good tune, no screw should ever loosen on your bow. I see people try to use Loctite on stuff. I see people use rubber O-rings and stuff. That works, it's a Band-Aid. However, get to the root of the problem. All right, my OCD drives right for it. Like if there's that much vibration in the system, something is out of tune during the shot. Okay, well that's further down. So slightly snug, remove your outer ones, use your inner ones, and you can move. There we go. You can move your limb this way or that way. Okay, and you're going to do this on both ends. So now, this is usually a time-consuming thing. If your limbs are not perfectly straight, and these are machined pretty, I don't want to say haphazardly, but it's bulk, right? Manufacturing on an assembly line. So sometimes they're not perfect. That's what this helps get you lined up for. Your goal, your goal is alignment. What is alignment? Actually, I'm going to pretend we're right-handed here. If you're left-handed, just reverse it. Your goal is to have the string traverse directly down the middle of this limb and directly down the middle of this limb, including the stabilizer bushing. Okay, most of us know this. Some of us have never seen it before. I have mine set up. You're all welcome to take a look at it. I have tuning forks on there, which make it real easy. You just stand like this, close one eye, and look down the line. And you'll see whether or not your string is aligned. If it's not, which happens more often than not, what you need to do is move those set screws in order to swing your limb one way or another until you're aligned. So this would be good alignment. If we have, let's say, this bottom limb, and I'm going to exaggerate a little bit here, is off. Oops. And what we're going to see is as the string comes down, it doesn't center over the stabilizer bushing, right? So how do we fix that? We need to swing this limb over to get it so that this string moves this way to where we want it to be. So we're going to back this off a little bit, and then we're going to tighten this a little bit. Does everybody get the concept of that? And we're going to swing it over just a little bit. When I say a little bit, I'm talking like 1/8 of a turn. Because you got to remember, this is 20-something inches of pivot point leverage. So we're moving the string that's connected out here all the way back here. If you do like 1/8 of a turn, that could move this thing up to 1/4 of an inch, which is quite a bit. So it's really small amounts. When I get really obsessive, what I'll do is I'll take 2 Allen keys and I'll put one on each side, okay? And I'll move them at the same time, like sort of opposing. So I'll back this one off as I'm tightening this one, and that moves the pocket perfectly. The danger of trying to do it with one tool, and this is any bow with a bronze lateral limb adjustment, is that you're going to back it out some estimated amount, and then you're going to turn this one in. The potential problem here is we may end up crushing the bronze. Okay, just a little bit, brass dovetail pocket. A lot of people have experienced this. I can't get my limb out of my rod. They're like, right? What has happened is the dovetail that's trapped in there is essentially being pinched, and as a result, you can't get it in or out. Okay, so that should be your first clue that you've over tightened your LLA nuts, and you need to back one of them off. Now, when you do that, immediately you're going to be out of tune, so you have to go through the whole process again. But once you get it and you're lined up, everything should be golden. You may have to do it on this one, you may have to do it on this one. What we tend to see is a lot. Beginners think, all right, I'm lined up because I go right through the center of my stabilizer bushing. These are really crappy drawings, I apologize. Is that lined up? No. The bow is not going to want to shoot.
This riser, as it sits right now, is exactly like that.
I fixed it.
Oh, did you fix it? Okay. So, like when it was first handed to me, for whatever reason, either they were very poorly manufactured limbs or whatever, the pockets were basically pointing way out of opposing. Directions.
Okay.
But gives you like a false reading of a tune.
You believe it's aligned, but a true line will always have 3 points of reference on that line. We don't have 3. We have 1. We need this guy and this guy, the center of the limbs, right? This is where biter blocks, tuning forks, something of that nature are critical. You cannot do LLA without them. Don't try. A lot of people try to eyeball it, like to the graphic on the limb or something like that. You need something physically tangible to tell you where's the center of that limb. Any questions about LLA? Because that's one of the more complex tuning topics for beginners. Sure.
The string, so you would take the string off, then do your adjustments and put the string on? Or?
That's a great question. So, you can remove the string, destring it, make your adjustments, put it back on. You can also, if you're not afraid of like scuff marks and whatnot, just make the adjustments with the string on there. You are under tension. What is going to happen when you do that and you start pushing is you're physically moving the limb this way, that way. The limb will have marks here because you're physically moving it, right? Under tension. So it's going to grind on your finish a little. If you don't mind that, it's perfectly fine. If you're obsessive and you want
character.
Yeah. If you want like your limbs to look pristine all the time, I would recommend de-string, re-string on each one. You can do it that way though. You absolutely can. Anything else about LLA? No? How are we doing on time? Good, 20 minutes.
Yeah, you're about 20 minutes in.
Perfect. All right, so last thing is set up the bow, make it shootable. Knocking point. You gotta tie it on. I won't go into how to tie knocking point. There's lots of videos out there. I recommend a served knocking point that follows the grain of your serving. Let me explain that. Your serving is wrapped one way or another on the string. It's either wrapped this way or it's wrapped this way. When you tie your knocking point, it should be done the same way. Don't ever cross it. And there's a very important reason for this. If you cross it, it's gonna slip. And it's not mobile because it wants to slip. So you're gonna tighten it down and it's gonna be like, and that's it, right? When you align it with the serving direction, what have you done? You've created threads. Oh, what do threads let us do on a bolt? That's right. We can now physically adjust the position of the knocking point without having to cut it and retie it. This is critical for tunability, okay? It's part of your toolbox of tuning. Your knocking point should be tight enough that it doesn't want to move on its own. It should be long enough that pressure on it won't slide it. But if you need to, you can turn it a rotation, or 2, or 3, or 4, and it's gonna ride up those threads. I'm gonna turn back because I gotta shoot tomorrow. I'm never afraid to make changes with my bow, by the way. If you understand tuning, you can always fix it with a very short order. So tie your knocking point with your serving direction, okay? It doesn't matter which one, you just have to know it, and then you can ride it up and down as necessary. Where do I put it? Experience will tell you. For now, when you're first starting out, I always tell people just put it about a ½ inch above. ½ inch above meaning?
Explain where you're measuring that ½ inch at.
That's exactly what I'm about to do. Bow square.
Turn the knock until you put it against the feather.
Oh.
There you go.
Again, reference points. They're your savior when things go wrong. We taught you about the reference points for the rest. There's a reference point for your knocking point. I teach center of the plunger. You can choose whatever you'd like. You can use bottom of the plunger tip, top of the plunger tip.
That he's referring to the bottom of the bow square going through the center of the plunger. I actually do the bottom of the plunger.
Right. It's up to you.
It's different for everybody.
Just know what you use and be consistent. For me, I pick the center and then I move about a ½ inch up.
So the bottom of the
bottom
top,
of the knock.
Top knock, yeah.
Right. All right, so I'll draw that to make it clear.
That's a good idea.
All right. So we're through with this stuff. We're doing knocking point. So for knocking point, like I said, here's your plunger tip, right? For me, bow square right dead smack through the middle, like that. And my zero mark is here. I'm about ½ inch. That was a weird way to write it. is like right here, okay? My arrow knock will be right there. Top and bottom knocking points. That's just the starting point. Just like the center shot, it's a guess. Nothing is final. Nothing is ever final in my world, but that's my starting point, okay? That gets you with a nice, slight downwards angle. A lot of people are like, oh, I want it parallel. No, that's not how the bow shoots. Why? Because our grip is lower than our anchor, and we're not firing through the center of the bow, so we need a slight down angle. How much do we need? Depends on your form, depends on the bow setup. Tiller, I forgot about that. People are like, oh, what tiller should I use? Make your life easy. 0. Okay, we're not recurves. We don't anchor way down here. Just set it to 0. You know why? Because if it moves, you always know how to make it go back to 0 without a ruler.
And just for new people, or people who maybe watch this later on, 0 means even.
Even.
Even top from, you want to show them? With,
Yep.
You show them with the bow square so that.
No, I'm on purpose.
Oh, I know what you're doing. All right, all right.
I go to competition, put my bow together, and know right away whether my tiller is even. Tiller is measured from the limb pocket at a perpendicular angle to the string. I'll just hold my thumb like that. Okay? Is it the same? Oh, look, it is. If it's not, I know right away. I don't need a ruler to be like, oh, I gotta turn this in until it's exactly 1/8 of an inch. It's not gonna shoot that different. Tiller does not affect the shot as much as people would like it to. What little effect it does have on the shot can easily be compensated with knocking point in barebow. That makes sense?
That doesn't mean you shouldn't check it. Ask me why I know.
Yes, you do check it every time you shoot your bow. There's 3 things I do when I get to the line. This is kind of off topic, but I'll go like this, and you can hear it. If something is loose, it will vibrate immediately. Take the line, vibrating stuff off. Just a nice bong, right? If I got a loose plunger, rest, whatever, you'll hear bzzz, right? That's a problem. 2, check my tiller. Tuning fork. And 3, which I'm about to get to, is check plunger contact with my arrow. Why do I check plunger contact with my arrow?
Make sure your wire didn't get bent.
That's one reason.
Yes. So our knocking point is based on this. If I look at this from behind, here's the plunger tip. I want the dead center of the arrow, dead center to my plunger. Always. Again, consistent reference point. Just like the rest, up against the screws. We know if anything moves, I have nothing to be afraid of. People like worry about their wire getting bent, right? I don't care. Why? Because I can fix it very quickly, because I know if I put this right here, I move the wire in or out because it is sloped. So when it being sloped, if I move it in, the arrow goes up. If I pull it out, the arrow goes down. I can position it within 5 seconds.
So that it lines up in the middle.
So that it lines up in the middle again, which means I never have to worry about is my arrow pointed low or pointed high. Does that make sense? That takes care of knocking point, and it takes care of plunger tip engagement with the wire. Again, if I push it in, this rides higher. If I pull it out, it drops lower. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, how do you adjust the tiller? Or what?
Good question. I didn't say that.
You can. Yeah, you can do that. That's fine. I mean,
I'll
Saw how
just,
you measured it.
yep.
let me put this back together and we can just put it on display.
So for tiller, you have a limb, you have a limb. I'm gonna be real crude here, right? We're doing 2 measurements. This one, your top and your bottom, right? And ideally we want them equal. If one of them is off, you need to adjust your tiller adjustment. To adjust your tiller, it's the same as increasing your poundage, you're just doing it on one or the other. The easiest way to remember this is I'm screwing in a screw. okay? If I screw in a screw, I'm gonna get closer to the board that I'm trying to screw it into. That shortens the distance. So as you turn it in clockwise, this distance gets smaller. If you back it out by unscrewing the tiller bolt, you're unscrewing it, this distance gets larger. Okay? Your goal is to have it equal, which means if one of them is off in size, pick one and adjust it. Doesn't matter if you go larger or smaller, whichever, pick one. What will that do? That will change your overall draw weight. So if you have like a very specific draw weight you want to be at, you got to find that and fiddle with it, working these at the same time. Does that make sense?
So we all understand tiller bolt, locking nut, you have to take turns off of this one to add turns to this one. And then you find your even. To get your tiller, you have to play top and bottom to get it right. I actually did it during the tournament today.
Yep.
As like a knucklehead. But at any rate, you know, because I usually shoot even all the time. And I'm like, man, it's like doesn't feel forgiving, and then it messes with your head, and then you're messing around. I'm standing on the shoe, and I'm like, and I check, and it was like about a little over a quarter inch off. I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
I thought you checked your brace. I had no idea.
I checked my brace height. I did not check my tiller before we started.
So, do brace height and tiller move linear, or does that?
There's a relationship, yes, but they're not directly associated. Brace height's a function of string length and preload on the limbs. If you shorten your string, you increase your brace height, right? If you preload your limbs more, you'll increase your brace height. It depends where you want your brace height. There's no right answer to that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. All right, so we understand how to adjust tiller now? Cool. Okay, so we have a bow that's put together. It's lined up. It's at zero tiller. We have a knocking point. We have a rest and plunger set up. We should be ready to shoot, right? This is the secret sauce. This is what I teach my students. You're all gonna get it for free. I'll probably regret it. I don't make money coaching anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Nobody does.
Shh. I have a cycle. It's a 4-step cycle. Before I get into it, I'm gonna ask, does anybody understand the relationship between variables in a barebow setup?
That's too complicated.
Yes, exactly. Everything affects everything else in barebow.
Yeah.
That's a core tenet that people don't want to wrap their mind around. If you change one thing, you indirectly affect everything else. It is impossible to avoid that. That math happens no matter what, because we only have so many parameters to work with. For the trad people, the longbow people, the less you have to work with, the worse it gets. It gets more challenging, right? We have center shot in barebow. We have plunger tension, things like that. You go to trad, you lose some of that. If you go off the shelf, you don't have an adjustable shelf. If you go to longbow, you don't even have a plunger, right? So fixing a lot of stuff becomes even more challenging. But at least in barebow, we have all those variables. So I have a 4-step cycle that I teach. And it will get any beginner on the target at 10 yards very quickly, okay? Once you have your rough setup, figure out what your crawl is, okay? Pick your arrow, whatever it's gonna be, start with something tunable. That's usually what I suggest. Don't go with glue and points, because glue and points you gotta be like pretty on. Whereas something with screw and points, you get a big box and a couple of test kits, and you can have 100 grain, 125 grain, 145 grain, 175 grain, 200 grain points.
So hold on 1 second before you go too far into that. We're really talking about probably teenager to adult, not little kid. Okay, just because you're not going to get very few 10-year-olds are going to shoot 100 grain point or 125 grain point or 150 grain point. But you know, you may not be shooting. I don't know, with kids, I don't do a crawl at all initially.
Yeah.
Teach them in the gap shoot. We're aiming off.
You can.
Shoot, figure out where it's at. Just teach that concept first with littles. So I'm talking probably 10, 11 and under. You know, you can start teaching the crawling somewhere in there. But in regards to like what Elton's talking about with the point weights and all that stuff, because I know where he's going with it, you can do that then with that bigger, stronger kid, young, adult, whatever, any age adult.
I've actually had success teaching like 8-year-olds the crawl.
Oh,
Again, they're not going to shoot far. They're going to be 10 yards max kind of thing.
Not initially. Like the first thing, I'm not teaching them to crawl on the first arrow.
So we all know what a crawl is. A crawl is how far down you come on the string. Where's my tab? Somewhere. I think I left it over here. Right? It's how far down we come on the string. There's a couple ways you can do it. Where's your tab? You have a Predator, or you have a standard Yost?
No, I have the same one.
Oh, okay.
I don't have a standard one.
Some tabs have markings milled into them. Repetitive? No, I have Predator.
Okay. Yeah, mine
some
has markings.
Are smooth. Oh yeah, perfect. That's what I want. Some of them have markings. Some of them are smooth. You could do it either 2 ways. It's up to you. It's personal preference. I like smooth. I put paper tape on and I draw my line where I want to be if it's a specific distance, like indoor. Okay? You can also use pre-milled, and then you just need to learn to count which number / you want to be. I have pretty crappy near eyesight, which means lots of lines, my brain gets lost. So for me, this is better. Personal preference. Whatever you find your crawl to be is where you need to move down. And I think most of you are doing this now, but if you're not, knock your arrow on the line. I didn't fix my wrist. Okay. Bump up against the knock. I'm facing the wrong way. Bump up against the knock. There's a couple ways you can do this. You can memorize the position and slide down. If you don't feel comfortable, put your fingernail, bend the material out of the way, put your fingernail right where the mark is, come down to be even, and set your hook. Right? That's our crawl. When you're first starting out, you have no idea where the crawl is. You're guessing. That's okay. Over time, you'll have experience. You'll say, oh, for the draw weights that I shoot and the arrow weights I shoot, it'll be roughly here. So start with a big target. Usually I put them in front of a 4x4 at 10 yards. Does everybody understand the mechanics of a crawl? Like how you adjust? No, I don't have all the knots. Okay, so when you're on the string and you have your arrow knocked and you come down a certain amount, this is very easy to remember. Here's the X, right? If you aim, point on, center, and the shot goes low, move your crawl up. Follow the direction that you want the shot to go. Does that make sense? And if you're too high, come down. All you're doing is chasing the X. Move up or down accordingly until you find that spot where you're kind of close in that range as far as height. This should take like 10 shots at 10 yards at most. Like I said, I can put someone on paper very quickly this way. Once you do that, and it's again requires some level of consistency on your release and your form. Once you do that, the second step is center shot. Remember how I said just guess? That's fine. It's probably going to put a group somewhere. If my plunger was too far out, so out on a right-handed shooter would be like a group somewhere out here. If it was too far in, it'd be a group somewhere out here. Okay? We're not futzing with the spring tension at all. We left it in the middle. That doesn't matter here. What we're trying to do is aim the shot towards the center. We fix the height with a crawl. We fix the windage, for firearms terms, with your center shot. Everything else about your shot has to be consistent and the same. You have to have the same anchor, same release, same follow through, all of that. If you do that, within minutes, you can put any arrow, doesn't matter how badly out of tune it is, close to the center. Promise you. You can go home and try it next week. Grab any random bow, set it up, grab any random arrow, you can do it. Might fly like crap, but it'll hit near the middle, okay? Now you're shooting with fletched arrows and everything great, hunky-dory. But they may not be flying great. This is where, if you're shooting consistent, you take it to the next step. The next step is tweaking the knocking point. This is where bear shaft tuning comes in. So for a lot of beginners, this is intimidating. Don't let it scare you. It's not a big deal. At 10 yards, you won't miss the target. If you have a decent sized target, you won't break an arrow shaft, I promise, okay? Your knocking point dictates how the bear shaft comes off the bow. Your form and your release will do it too. But by and large, you want this coming off as straight as possible. You don't want it coming off and flying down range like this. You don't want it doing this for the first 5 yards because it slams through the rest. Because then what's going to happen is eventually it's going to bounce and it's going to come through. You want it coming off clean every time, straight off the rest. Does that make sense? Knocking point helps us see this. Fletching corrects for it so quickly we can't tell. So we do a bare shaft, and that'll tell us as it's coming off the bow where it's going to land. And this is where bare shaft grouping comes in. There's a lot of stuff out there about it. If your bare shafts are landing low or high, you can tweak the knocking point accordingly. If it feels like the tail is too high, bring it down. If it feels like the tail comes off low, bring it up a little. Now you see why this is so important. You need to be able to adjust that right now, like right now. Oh, it's coming off low, dip, 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 dip. Try again.
While we're having the discussion about those knock sets and adjusting, so here's a forewarning, and it took me way too long to learn this. When I would set my knock, or when I would set my crawl, I would go in and I would go really hard into the knock because I was like, oh, I want to make sure I'm really in there at the exact same spot. And over time, if you shoot a high volume of arrows with a movable knock set, you can actually physically slide that up a little bit at a time every time you do it. Now, Elton mentioned about tying them longer. That helps tremendously. But even if you're pushing, think about it, it's still like, this is fabric. You know, it's a synthetic fabric of some kind that they make for knock sets. As you push into that, you're going to slowly push it up. And it may come loose. You know, if you don't have this tied correctly, if you tied it the wrong way, I guarantee you it will move it in relationship to the way that the string is served. So I consciously do now. I touch and that's it. I'm not shoving it into the knock. Touch the exact same spot, and Elton touched on it, but like the way I call it, posting the thumb. Up against, I am middle +1. So I always try to keep my crawls for outdoor and indoor within the same 1/4 inch on my tab. I just set my setup so it's in the same area. My anchor is the same all the time. Everything feels the same. Up against, I'm middle +1. Post the thumb, slide it down, and I pinch my tab down just like that every single time. Pinch my tab, finish my hook. Now that's not a tuning thing, but the reason I'm mentioning it is if you're constantly slamming your tab up into that knock, you're gonna, over time, your tune may start to change. And you're gonna be chasing it with your tab, like we's teaching you right now. Oh my gosh, I'm going up, I'm hitting low, why am I hitting low? So I'm crawling higher, I'm crawling higher. Why is this happening over time? And from a tuning perspective, if you're shooting, and you know that like everything was really good, especially in practice, because that's where you shoot your best arrows, right? So we're shooting, but over time, why am I continuing to crawl one direction? Why am I going up? Why am I going down? Why am I going left? Why am I going right? That's where you have to recognize, okay, a light bulb needs to come on. It happened to me today. A light bulb needs to go on. I need to check something. And then go through the whole list that he just went through. Go through the whole list. Takes 5 minutes. I am 100% guilty of not doing it. I didn't check my tiller today. My fault. I own that. So check it. Okay, that's not right. Let's try to fix it and make those adjustments.
Yep. So we know how to crawl to chase the center. We know how to center shot to chase the center. And now we're tweaking the knocking point as well. Remember how I said this is cyclical? If you change your crawl, that's fine. If you change your center shot, you need to go check your crawl. There's a good chance it may have moved when you're first setting up the tune. Why? Because everything's moving slightly. If you change your knocking point, make sure your crawl's good. Why? Because the arrow's coming off different. It may not dive low anymore. It may not sky high skim anymore. Porpoise, whatever you want to call it. So you need to make sure you're tuning at the correct distance crawl. Every time you make a change, you need to go back to the beginning and work your way down. This is very important. A lot of people forget this. A lot of people forget this. You can't just change one thing and assume the entire system stays balanced the rest of the way. Like I said, everything is interrelated, okay? This is where most beginners stop, and that's okay. You have a shootable bow at this point. You may get collisions, you may get fletching contact, things like that. That's where you take the next step to really tune your bow. You're tuning your arrow to your bow and you. And I say that explicitly because it's a system. All three things have to work together. If you change, which we do, over day to day, that can throw your tune out. Obviously, if you change your bow and increase the draw weight, anything of that nature, that can affect the tune. If you change the arrow, make the point heavier, cut it, make it shorter. I won't say changing the fletching matters. The weight difference there doesn't really matter. That can affect it also. What we're shooting for, no pun intended, is a good spine. A good spine creates archer's paradox, right? So out of the bow, we get that, we get that, we get that. You want your shaft to wiggle slightly on the way downrange. You don't want it going like fishtail crazy. You don't want it dead solid either. You need a little bit of movement. That little bit of movement is why you have a plunger. A plunger is a shock absorber. A lot of people forget that. The tension that you set it helps absorb that initial compression. As the bowstring comes forward, compresses the hell out of the arrow, this is called dynamic spine. It's different than static spine. Static spine is we put this on a meter, 28.5 inches apart, whatever the stupid standard is. We put exactly 2.1 pounds of weight on the front, in the center, and how much does it bend at that distance, at the center, okay? That's static spine. That's not the same as, believe it or not, inertia says this arrow tip doesn't want to start moving when the bowstring is released. You're actually going to get compression. We've probably all seen videos of this, right? It'll start moving right away, but in that split second you get a slight flex. That's what the dynamic spine is. Your goal is to tune your dynamic spine to match your release, how it comes off your fingers. Because, again, right-handed archer, reverse it for a left. Here's the string. When it rolls off your fingers, the string is going to go out a little bit, which means the arrow is starting that way. Okay?
We're getting beyond basic.
I know. So just keep in mind, you want to try to get that flex right. For beginners, remember how I said don't use glue and points, use screw in? Fastest way and easiest way and non-destructive way, because you can easily reverse the change, is just screw in a heavier or lighter tip. And you'll see what happens. You'll immediately see it. And I encourage you all to experiment and try it, okay? If you do that with bare shafts, it'll be very obvious. So usually this is the cycle that I go through. And if you go through it a few times, you get closer and closer and closer to the point where the bare shaft flies right with the fletch group into the center. And that's where we call it a tuned setup. Now, again, things change. You may have a weird day, you don't hit full alignment because you're tired, whatever, that can affect the system. If you're good at this whole setup step, you can adjust the bow on the fly, build the system. If you know, like I'm constantly shooting a little left, don't be afraid to change your center shot. Be mindful of it. Does it change your crawl? Do I need to tweak my knocking point? Do I see things coming off funny? If you have witness watching, hey, your arrows are kind of doing this downrange. Maybe your knocking point's off, okay? It probably could be tweaked by changing it, but usually knocking point, what I find is the archer is following through in a different way, okay? Where your draw side elbow is essentially dictates where your hand is gonna go. So what the most common thing I see is tail high. A lot of people see.
Wait.
And that's a result of, if this were my hook and my elbow going down, what does that do to the tail of the arrow on release? Loose it upwards, right? And then it's like this, right out of the gate. And the fletching are trying to correct it and bring it back down, and then you may end up with low hits for some reason.
Way beyond basic.
I know. But that's
it's hard. It's hard, and you know I've had people ask questions or make comments about like the stuff that we talk about is intermediate or above. And I don't necessarily think that it is. I think it's the idea of what we're explaining most often. It's all connected.
Right.
So like anybody can throw a Hoyt super rest on a bow and go shoot it at factory spec and have a great time with it. It's fun. You know, you're not going to hit where you're aiming at with the point, but you can aim off and you'll be good. But when it comes to like this stuff, without getting into the alignment and all the other stuff, and like this is just the basic, like if you're going to start shooting, just master this part.
Right.
Here's where the problem comes, and we do it in discussion. You're already going probably past intermediate to advanced. The problem that comes up is that your form, if you can't keep a group, and I was going to say it, but I didn't. You know, we're looking at, this is the picture of the gold, right? And you know, and Alan's like, you know, a little bit, what's that?
That's a whole target.
Okay, this is a whole target. All right, so this is your gold right here.
Yes.
And if your group is here, here, and here, tuning is not what we need to worry about. And a lot of people really like obsess over, you know, their tuning things. And I'll tell you why. What's proof that perfect tune isn't the most important thing, because I could go pick up his bow right now and explain his bow is set up exactly not what we just talked about, but because of his alignment and where his string blur is, it works for him. Works amazing for him. Not just works for him, works amazing for him.
Right.
So you can't just say, and we've said this numerous times, we've said it on the podcast, multiple videos, tune isn't the end all be all. If you're obsessing over tune and you can't keep the targets in the red at all, ever, you're thinking about the wrong stuff and you're worried about the wrong stuff. There's a whole other aspect of learning to shoot, dealing with target panic, having a consistent hook, anchor, alignment, string blur, and we're not gonna have, I don't know if we'll have time, I don't even know if I'm gonna be able to get into this, but, and all that other stuff, that's what matters right now. Not, oh my gosh, my plunger's not in the perfect spot and maybe I'm over-spined a full spine on an arrow, because you can make that stuff work. It's not forgiving, don't get me wrong, that tune isn't forgiving. We're not teaching, this is not a forgiving tune, it's a basic tune. When you get to forgiving, you're getting to intermediate to advanced discussions,
right.
Point weight, arrow lengths, you know, depth of the hook this young man's dealing with right now, depth of your hook, all that stuff, because all that's going to turn around, like what Elton started getting into, is going to start having effects on everything else.
Right. That's why that line at the bottom there is there. Most beginners should stop here, okay? Until you're shooting those groups like Frank just talked about.
What are the softwares?
That's something that we're going to get into if we have time.
Yeah, we will.
What's the time frame?
Chiropractor hasn't moved out of that room, so.
No, that's fine. We don't have to go into it.
Out here.
No, we
have 10.
Who's the next guy coming in 10 minutes?
But hey, I asked him, I said, you don't mind if we run over for a little while, because I want you guys to be able to give these people the benefit of your knowledge.
Well, I think we're just going to try to answer some tuning questions, because this is a heck of a
deep dive.
A deep dive, and we won't have time for it. Well, it is what it is.
We might.
All right. Do you have anything else you want to go into before we answer some questions?
No, it's question time.
Q&A. Any tuning questions? Right off the bat. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So we're getting out of the beginner phase. Obviously, we're turning up to nationals. That change where you're starting to make a forgiving tune, right? You're not just getting your bow working. How do you start recognizing why the tune is making it really hard for you versus your form that's making it hard for you? I'm starting to see this now, right?
We went from basic to advanced like that.
Yeah. So the question is, how do I know when I really need to have a good tune? Is essentially what you're asking.
Or when it's like, okay, it's my tune
that's causing the issue.
I'm fighting rather than my form I'm fighting.
Right.
I know they're interrelated.
They are interrelated. Your consistency is obvious, but the pattern won't get smaller.
Right.
All right. Firearm analogy. It's like you're stuck on a medium choke and you're trying to go to a fine choke and you just can't get there. So your pattern looks something like this, right?
You can probably erase some of this.
Yeah. Yeah, we call it circling the wagons. right? So here's the 10, 9, 8, 7, right? And you're like, you're here, 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 here. Like you look at your target at the end of the day, ignore the handful of flyers that like you slipped or something screwed up, right? And your pattern is like that. And I can't seem to close it in smaller than the 7 ring. That's your answer. Like, you know you're shooting good shots, you know they're consistent, but for some reason, they just won't go any smaller. Usually it's a tune issue. Usually you're getting fletching contact of some sort, right? You're relying too much on fletching to correct, right? The best archers in the world could shoot bare shafts and put them in the 10 or the gold all the time without fletching, because the bow is set up in tune to put the arrow right there. It doesn't need aerial guidance from fletching. Fletching is there to mask when we have a release error or a form error and try to correct for it as the arrow's going down range.
That's where you generate forgiveness.
Right.
So, I mean, and let me also preface what Elton just said with, if you're shooting, and even if you're in the area, right? We're in the area. You're not keeping 3 arrows in the goal. You shoot 3 arrows in the goal once in 20 ends. You're not quite there. But if you're in the red, you're in a real good spot. But if you notice, all of a sudden where'd that marker go? If you have an end and generally all your arrows are there, then all of a sudden you go boom, 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 and you don't know why. But that group's tight, right? It's probably a form thing that you just did, and you don't know what it is. I mean, and again, this is way beyond tuning, but when I'm seeing this north of the 10 ring, as a coach, I'm thinking head movement, I'm thinking hook issue, I'm thinking I better check my tune. What if my knocks are moving, my string is stretching, I don't know what direction it's going. Like there's a line item list, like as a coach, when I have a shooter and I'm like, what? Why did that just do that? And I'm like, do you know what you did? No, I don't know what I did. Okay. We'll pick, and then I'm like, no, this is beyond tune. Pick a thing, fix it, make it right. You have to send, John talks about sending a scout arrow for field, right? That arrow has to be perfect. That first arrow has to be money, because you have to know what adjustments to make on a field course, right? Well, indoors is the hardest game. You have to make every arrow right, because there's no other conditions that are going to mess us up other than the condition of this. So that's where we get into, trying to make, as a shooter, you have to know, are those 3 arrows good scout arrows? Are they correct? Okay, felt right, flew right, landed right, except I'm 4 inches high or I'm 4 inches left. Okay, well, did I check my string blur? Is my string blur right? Or did I maybe mess that up? Maybe that's why I'm left and instead of in the middle. So it's a revolving door. And the door goes both directions all the time, and sometimes they align perfect, and that's where we want to be. But it's hard to find that, and that's way beyond basic. But that's okay. The basic discussion might be over.
But that's essentially the answer. Is when do I need to know I really need to work on my tune? It's when the group you can't seem to get it smaller. Yeah. And there are limitations where it's like this setup is at its limit. It can't get any better.
That's a fair point, because you might be a spine off, or a point weight off from the spine where you really truly need to be, and all of a sudden, that's why we talk about group tuning. And there was a post on one of the groups a few weeks ago about paper tuning, and somebody was going all ham on why they should or shouldn't do it. But group tuning, when you go and you can bang, and I'll give you an example. If you're like, here's your 10, right? This is 10, 9, 8, 7. And you're like this every end. For the love of God, you probably just need to move your center shot over. Yeah. If you're keeping all of your arrows right here, and I say that kids hate moving stuff. You go to the Olympic side, it's the opposite. Kids, boom, deep, 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 boom, deep, back the other way. Boom, they're moving their sight left and right and up and down all the time. And as a coach, I should be like, that's not the problem. It's you. Well, in Barebow, if you can get that, Oh, it's money. It's money. Just move it over and make it go in the middle.
Yeah.
Now, on Barebow side, kids are like, I don't want to touch it. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to touch my tune. And I get it. I get it. In the beginning, I was that way too, until I started to understand, okay, well, this happens when I do this.
These two things are your sight dials for Barebow.
And Frank said the right thing on that tight group. By moving it, you can move it two ways. You said move your center shot, or you could do it with the spring tension. Like this young lady has a problem with the spring tension.
Yeah.
She'll fix that.
Yeah.
But
But
you got a tight group.
So I'm going to say something really controversial right now.
Guess what happens?
maybe not. We're maybe not. Hold on 1 second. Just hold that thought.
Yep.
If my group is here, and I start cranking on a plunger like it's a sight,
Yep.
your group's going to do this.
Exactly. And we all forget that a lot of times.
Do you understand? Does that's
If
actually
you're
a
doing
basic
this-
thing?
Your plunger pressure is perfectly dialed for your dynamics.
Don't
drive.
change it.
Don't mess with it.
Don't change
Just
it.
move the whole damn thing over
Right.
like your center shot.
So that's where you go to taking your center shot. And, here's your riser, and here's your plunger. From here, all you're doing is loosening this up, taking the nut this way, so that plunger comes back, and then you're moving this group to here.
And keeping the tightness.
And keeping the tightness.
That's right.
And a lot of people are like, they act like, especially compound and Olympic people that come over, they think the plunger is like a sight click, and it's just not. Like for me, on a good tune, I can go 3 to 4 clicks to get to the edge of the 9 this way. If I have a good tune, I know that somewhere in there, I can go 3 clicks this way and 3 clicks this way, roughly. It varies per setup. If it's John shoots a big fat PS23, I don't get that with that. I don't have that much variable.
It will vary for every archer because of how you shoot. With your hook, your release, your follow through, all of that. You will learn it over time. I'm at a point where I know one full rotation of the entire barrel of the plunger moves me about a ring. If I'm like 3 o'clock, 8 ring all the time, right? One full turn in will put me from out here to right here. That's all I got to do. I keep my biter wrench with me. I do not use the set screws. I just unlock it, spin it, turn it where I want it to be. If it's a one full turn out, one full turn in, whatever it is, snug it back down. You remember how I was very specific about that plunger tip position and how my wire, I moved the whole thing. What do I need to do? I need to move the wire too. Otherwise my arrow is high or low on the plunger tip. I know it's supposed to be dead center. 3 seconds later, I've recalibrated everything. This is why knowing your equipment is so important. Knowing how to tune it and tweak it is so important. Not being afraid to make those changes, which you learn through experience on the practice range.
There's a bow right there that doesn't have an arrow that goes down the center.
No, that
bow shoots tight groups in the middle.
That 100%, you've proven that today and
Yep.
yesterday. That bow has a PS23 going down the middle to left side of the shaft is right.
out.
It's this way. It's in. No, it's in.
Oh, it's in?
Because his string blur. So think about this. His string blur is on the inside edge of the riser,
The side we never use.
which is the side we don't typically use.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's where that's different. This is, again, we're beyond basic at this point. Forewarning for anyone who watches this or listens. That's where his form, his alignment, and his anchor puts the string, and that's where it works for him, and that's where his tune works for him. So, and we have, when it comes to Olympic recurve coaches, they automatically want to set a Barebow up. This is the way we do an Olympic recurve. It should be the same. It's not the case.
Never the case.
I don't care who the recurve coach is that says that. I will argue that till I run out of breath. That is not the same. Barebow is different, and it's different for every shooter.
And you have to understand that system. That's why whenever I refer to it, it's a system. It's you, your bow, and your arrow.
Yep.
And they are all interrelated.
Any other questions?
These are good questions.
And when we say best tune, you mean tightest group. Is that generally what
I
you mean by best?
would say
So this
there's
is where
stages of tune
yeah,
for sure.
And then the conversation diverges at an advanced level. you can have an arrow that doesn't look great on tune that groups exceptionally well. So the best tune is not always the end all be all, but it gets you most of the way, right? You can't start off with, I'm gonna shoot tail high all the time and try to figure out a way to make that group well. Get a better tune first so that it's a little more forgiving, and then make small changes here or there, whether it's plunger tension, not center shot, or knocking point, whatever it is, till it shoots tighter group. And like I said, to a point, there may be setups where that's as good as it gets. I'm obstinate. I really wanted to shoot these arrows indoor at some point. I've had them for 4 years. They're a 500 spine. I'm not a big guy. I'm not supposed to shoot heavy draw weight. I had to go all the way up to 38 pounds to get this dynamic spine correctly. I have 165 grains in the front. It's not ideal. I've shot far better scores with different arrows, but I was just like, really want to shoot them at least once. So I'm putting myself in a box by saying I want to use these, which means I'm limited. I have tuned the bejesus out of these, and I can't get them to close in on the 10 perfect. Now, part of that's me and my mental process because of target panic, but when I'm shooting great in practice, I still can't get it to always close in. I'll get 9 liners. They're good, clean shots, they're well aimed, but something with the dynamic spine is just enough to say, I'm gonna wander a little this way, or a little this way, or a little this way, a little this way, and I'm getting all these edge niners. So there are limitations. Now, if you really want to pursue better, then you got to say at a certain point, that's not going to cut it. I need to move to something different and experiment. I always strongly recommend, don't be afraid to try, especially if you're practicing. What's the harm? If you know your reference points, you can put your stuff right back where it's supposed to be. Bless you.
Anybody else?
Any other questions?
Go ahead.
Sure.
So I understand, don't be afraid to change and everything, but how long would you give it before you, like, so you make
Personal preference.
Yeah,
So-
I'm glad.
How
No, I am
obstinate are you?
glad you asked that though, because I have a shooter that I'm coaching in Denmark right now, and that shooter does not shoot the same setup for more than 2 weeks, and it drives me up a wall because we had to make a bunch of form changes. Was shooting a super low anchor, which when they were complaining about the big crawl, I'm like, that's because you're shooting a super low anchor. That's not a tuning thing per se. It has some relation, but and I finally said, all right, you're not making any more changes. You need to finish indoor season with your indoor setup. Forget outdoor, because the shooter wanted to, like, well, I think I might want to go back to my outdoor limbs that are 38 pounds and I'm shooting 32 right now. And I was like, no. Finish your indoor season with your indoor setup. You'll have plenty of time to shoot your outdoor limbs because you're just getting used to those now. You're just seeing your scores start to climb again.
It's
But then they're going to go and make a change.
Yeah, it's kind of the flip side of your question. So how long do you stick with something before you give up? That's personal preference, right? You can go weeks, months, years, whatever. If you make a change, the more important question is, if you make a change, how long must I stick with it to give it a chance? Usually, rule of thumb is 3 to 4 weeks, at least. Don't give up right away because it takes time for you to adapt. Like I said, everybody has off days where your form changes a little bit, whatever. If you're good, you'll learn to adjust for it and things like that. But if you give up in 2 weeks...
The 3 to 4 weeks was kind of what I was looking
Yeah, if you give up in 2 weeks, your form could have changed 3 times in that 2 weeks. It could have been you. It wasn't the gear, right? So always give it time. You give it a fair chance.
Thanks, guys. You guys have done a tremendous job. As somebody who teaches tuning all the time on the recurve side and was anal enough to actually bare shaft tune at 90 meters when I was a competitor, I appreciate the fun stuff you guys have talked about today, and I just want you to accept the...
Oh, thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate
Appreciate it.
It was our
Thanks,
pleasure.
Bob.
It really was.
All right.
Hopefully y'all take something away from this.
I think that was our cue that we have to leave. So listen, before you guys head out, this is going to be available on the YouTube channel for the Patreon members only. If you want to look up that, by all means do it. I will probably take parts of it and put it out there, but if you want to watch it back or get access to the other stuff, join that and make sure you like the page. All right? Thank you all.
You're welcome. You're the only brave one.
How did we get mine?
Your bow's out of tune. You got issues.
Do you have it here?
Yeah.
I got mine too, if you want.
Go grab it.
If you want. If you want.
Go grab
More
it.
examples. Yeah. And we're not going to say necessarily anything you're doing is wrong. I'm not
No.
one of them people.
Mine just feels really off.
Okay.
I'm putting
The bow itself
way-
feels off.
I adjusted plunger because my coach said I was slightly to the left a little. But
Okay.
My center was slightly to the left. And
Okay.
I adjusted that. And,
Do you have an arrow?
yes.
Do you have your bow?
What do you want?
Nothing. Yeah, I forgot. You have biter blocks.
On what?
Do you have biter blocks too?
No, just my tuning
those.
forks.
And what is it that feels off?
It's just no matter what I do with the plunger now, it goes to the right.
Your arrow goes right.
Yeah, I'm usually pretty I'm pretty centered. It's usually like a top down.
Where's your string blur at? Do you know?
Right on the riser?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I aim with both vessels.
That's fine.
What spine and what point weight?
That is 20 pounds.
20 pounds?
Yeah.
And what's the spine of the arrow?
1614, that's like a 700 something.
Okay. 20 pounds, 700, that's probably over spine too.
Yeah, and your spring is too soft. You probably have a light spring in there.
Oh yeah, that's way soft.
Yeah,
You
so
said
that's-
no matter what you do, you hit right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you probably have the light spring for the biter in there, and you go to the medium. You know, and you have to think of it. You have to think of it this way. We're way ahead, but we have that bow there. If you have your plunger right here, right, and you have 3 springs. You have heavy, medium, and light. Right now, you have the light one in there, and you're hitting way to the right. When you crank that in, it's going to bring you only as far as that spring will allow it to go, right? Yeah. So that's where the medium picks up at the light side. So you crank that all the way in. When you go to the medium, and that medium's cranked all the way out, it picks up where the light spring was cranked all the way in.
Biter has engineered it so that each spring
do you know what
picks
I mean?
up where the
So
next one is.
this is your heavy side of the light spring. This is your light side. This is the light side of the medium spring. This is the heavy side. This is the light side of the heavy spring. This is the heavy side.
Yeah. You have probably a combination of things going on. With your string blur centered on the riser, if your hook isn't super clean, the string is leaving a little to the left right out of the gate, which is going to point the arrow to the right. And then because the spring is not strong enough, there's nothing stopping it, so it just like says, I'm going to go right.
Yeah.
So I would suggest 2 things. One, switch to the medium spring. Back the barrel out most of the way so that you're picking up, like Frank showed you, right here, right? You want to start probably right here. So that's like almost all the way out. And then also on the biter.
Probably like an 8 then on the...
Depends who you ask. Some people, I won't mention names, John Demmer, counts from right to left. Most people count left to right.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
No kidding. I didn't know he...
Yeah. He goes, put it at a 3.
There's a lot
I'm
of stuff
like,
that
what are
he
you
does
kidding me? That's so
backwards.
tight. He's like, no, that's almost all the way out. I'm like,
Oh, so that's...
so John talks about it backwards. So that depends who you're talking to.
Because he's got the 5 as his reference and he just...
I use 5 as my reference too, but I go up because I count left to right like most people.
Yes.
He counts right to left.
The most complicated thing about intermediate to advanced tuning for barebow is, as your form gets better, your tune changes.
Constant.
And people fight changing their tune. I'm kind of guilty of it as well. And it's a matter of like recognizing it and being able to, and that could also be a thing that's like going on with a shooter who's new but ventures to intermediate shooting, and they're like, but this is my tune, this is my tune.
And this is what I'm going to teach you today.
And then we get thick-headed and we're like, but or we don't know when to make a change.